Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so looking forward to because it is a recommendation style video. That's right, today I'm going to be recommending some binge-worthy books. All plot, no thoughts is the theme of today's book recommendations. All of the recommendations today, in my opinion, are unputdownable, completely pull you in and kind of take over your life for the span of reading them. You will want to know what's going to happen next. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first couple of books I have to recommend are actually newer reads for me, and I was just completely obsessed with them while I was reading them. The first is The Will of Many by James Isington, but this is the first book to a new fantasy series, and it's very much inspired by ancient Rome. Basically, the story is set in an empire that is very colonially minded and has basically taken over all of the land and the surrounding areas. There's also something called the will. Will or willpower in this book and in this world isn't something that's just symbolic of someone having like a strong state of mind, but is actually something that can be harnessed. Basically, every single civilian has to give over their will to the empire, and based on the hierarchy of this world, different people can harness different amounts of will across the populace. So there is a strong moral question surrounding the magic system in this world, which is honestly fascinating. But this story centers our main character Viz, and Viz has been spending many years trying to keep a low profile. He successfully sort of passed himself off as an orphan in a faraway like satellite city to the empire. However, Viz is hiding a very big secret, and that he's like the lost prince of a once powerful kingdom that was taken over by this empire, and he has his sights on kind of escaping the empire without having to give over his will at all. At the beginning of this book, though, he's basically scouted by a very powerful person within the government, and he recruits Viz to be a spy and attend this like very prestigious military school on this remote island. So from there, we follow our main character Viz as he not only trains to become a part of the school, learn more about this very complex political system that exists within this empire, be pulled between so many groups of people who want to use him for different reasons, fit in and go to class on a daily basis, and also traverse very dangerous situations to try to gather answers for various powerful political individuals. This book centers ancient magic and so much intrigue. The plot went in so many different directions. I was absolutely flabbergasted as I was reading along. Viz, as the main character, roots this book so well. Not only is he very, very capable, he's a really likable young gentleman, and seeing him make connections and friendships and have to take on such perilous situations was honestly just a fascinating plot. There's training sequences, there's a magic school setting, but also so much more. This was a knockout for a first book to a new series. I could not put it down. I was obsessed while reading it, and I feel like you will fly through this as well. The next book I have to talk about is another newer release, and honestly it was one that caught me by surprise, and that is Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. I feel like this book is the perfect combination of a very plot-forward like fantasy story with compelling characters that also has like a dash of romance. All of these things work together to just make me not able to put this book down, and I flew through it when I was reading it. But this is a book that I would describe as like a urban fantasy meets steampunk-esque story in terms of the setting. It's also another Shakespearean retelling, but this time with Antony and Cleopatra. The book itself is a trial-based story where a group of citizens are basically selected at random to compete and fight to the death for the opportunity to gain mass riches. This is supposed to satiate the population's like desire for blood and to basically show that upward mobility is in fact possible. Very much like Hunger Games, Squid Game vibes, if you get my drift. In this book, we're predominantly following two main characters that are both entering the trials for their own reasons. The first is Kala, who is like a runaway princess who was involved in an uprising against the other king that used to exist within this land. She has been hiding and keeping a low profile ever since, but at the beginning of this book, she's basically propositioned by the heir to the throne, giving her the opportunity to get the revenge that she's always dreamed of by entering the trials and basically using that as an opportunity to kill the king. The other main character we follow is Anton, who's kind of this like con artist type character. In this world, there's basically a magic system which allows people to hop between bodies, like take full possession, and the only way to be able to tell that someone is now residing in a new body is that their eye color changes. It's a really cool concept, but in particular, Anton is very, very good at body hopping. He's entering the trials to try to get all of this money to basically save his childhood love. Kala and Anton cross paths at the very beginning parts of this trial, and they basically form an unlikely alliance, and the plot begins to unfurl from there. This book is intense. First and foremost, the trial setting of this is just absolutely bananas. It is a fight to the death, but the book itself does not take place in like a stationary arena. This fight, this competition that is broadcasted across the city takes place over the entire city. People are hiding and running around. It's very bloody. It's very, very dark, but it definitely created a very compelling plot line. Kala and Anton, our two main characters, were very interesting to read from. Their relationship was very complex and dynamic, and I enjoyed reading from their very morally gray point of view. The combination of these trials, the action, as well as the politics that are also involved in this book, as well as the dash of romance, just really made this such a quick read. It's also not too long of a book. I truly flew through it. The next book I have to recommend is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is a book that will basically put its claws in you and will not let you go until you finish it. At least that was my personal reading experience. But Yellowface is R.F. Kuang's literary fiction debut. Obviously, she has written many fantastic fantasy novels, but this is a contemporary leaning like satire story. And wow, is it a ride. In the story, we follow and read from our main character, June. And June was supposed to be a rising literary star after she graduated from her prestigious writing program alongside her friend, Athena. But while June's book never even got a paperback release, Athena became the world's new literary darling. And June was honestly not too thrilled about that. She just doesn't get the hype around Athena. Despite that, they kind of maintain their friendship, and due to a variety of circumstances, June is actually around Athena when she tragically passes away one night, and June basically decides to do the unthinkable. She steals Athena's unpublished manuscript, edits it, and passes it off as her own, selling it to publishers, making a huge amount of money, changes her name to a racially ambiguous Juniper song. And that, my friends, is only the beginning of this book, because this book begins to spiral out of control. This is R.F. Kuang's satire and criticism of not only the publishing world, the idea of authenticity, so many different concepts circling around writing and identity. This book is absolutely bananas and unhinged, and I assure you, you will not be able to put it down, in part because R.F. Kuang utilizes first-person perspective so well in this book. We are reading from June's point of view as she decides to make and also justify so many insane decisions that you almost feel complicit in her choices. No one in this book is particularly likable, but it's also just so compelling that you will fly through it. It also escalates in directions that you truly could not believe. It is sharp and cutting, and I feel like R.F. Kuang was very successful in what she was trying to accomplish within this book. And due to its intensity, I also feel like it's a perfect bingeable read. Next up, I have a few fantasy series that I feel like are just so gripping that they are perfect bingeable situations. The first is the Empire of the Wolf series by Richard Swan, the first one being the Justice of Kings. This is the perfect combination of like fantasy and thriller. It has an investigation element to this book that just makes it so compelling. The second book is also even better than the first, so in terms of marathoning, this is a great series to check out for that. But this book is set in an empire where the emperor sort of rules with an iron fist, and he also has these individuals called justices, which are able to roam the countryside and basically act as the judge and executioner to carry out the emperor's laws. They are very powerful individuals, not only in their intellect and their ties to direct power, but they also have magic and other fighting abilities as well. And in particular, we're introduced to Sir Conrad von Volt, who is considered by many the most powerful justice in the land. But this book is not from Sir Conrad's point of view, but instead his young female apprentice, who is writing this story from the future in a reflective way, which in it itself is a fantastic literary device. At the beginning of this book, we're basically following this crew as they arrive to a town to investigate a case of aristocratic corruption, but it sort of opens up a larger can of worms that points to a larger political conspiracy that could threaten the entire empire itself. This series is so gripping. I love the characters. I in particular love Helena, who is our main point of view character, who's again writing this book from the future. I found the cases to be so compelling and the mix of political intrigue to be fantastic. The plot itself just also balloons so successfully. You get this sense of like a pot being put on to boil, and you don't notice it until absolute chaos has broken out around you. This series has just absolutely pulled me in. I feel like it has everything you could ever want in a fantasy trilogy. It's just so entertaining. I loved it. I read both books so quickly. I'm obsessed. I'm truly just obsessed. The next fantasy series that I just think is oh so bingeable has to be the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I mean, the action, the intrigue, the drama that exists across this entire trilogy, the time skips, the large cast of characters. What is there not to love? Basically, there's nothing not to love. This is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, and it will absolutely grip you from page one, I assure you. This is an urban fantasy story set in the fictional island of Kekon. Here, there is a substance called Jade that only certain individuals can wear and use. If you are able to use it, it basically makes you stronger and faster than the average human. This substance is highly regulated and also controlled by very powerful crime families. On this island, there is predominantly two very powerful crime families that have been in kind of a stalemate or a cold war for a long time. But at the beginning of book one, that conflict is beginning to heat up once again, especially as the power balance begins to shift. In this series in particular, we are reading from predominantly a set of perspectives from one of those crime families called the Cows, reading from perspectives from so many different people in this family who also have different amounts and types of power. It's so interesting. The dynamic within and around this family is fascinating in itself, but obviously we have a literal war and conflict that's also existing on the streets too. The plot progression and how everything really expands throughout this trilogy is fantastic. The idea of legacy and blood and power is at the core of this book. It is unputdownable. If you want something with such fantastic like drama and action, the Greenbone Saga is for you. I know this is a popular one, but it's popular for a reason. Speaking of a popular series that I think is perfect to binge, I have to also talk about the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. I have read this entire thing through and through twice. Every single time I read it, it's all I think about. It consumes every fiber of my soul, my mind. I go to work, I finish my work so I can come back home and sit down and read the Stormlight Archives. That is how I felt every single time I checked out this series. It's so huge. The scale of this world, the scale of the conflict, the scale of the characters just makes you feel like you're living inside of it. It's so entertaining. Brandon Sanderson is also so fantastic at pacing plots, the reveals, the cliffhangers, the agonizing wait while you're trying to figure out what in the world is going on. This book will just burrow itself inside of you, and I assure you, it will absolutely take over your life. But if you're not familiar, the Stormlight Archives is set in a fantasy world where a group of individuals has been in conflict with another group of individuals for many generations. The primary group that we're reading from is basically a very war-oriented group. Their culture is all about like conflict and battle and blood and these types of things, and that is what they strongly value within their society. In this series, we're reading from a huge cast of characters. Every book sort of focuses though on one primary character while we're still getting perspective and storylines from other characters as well. Some of those primary characters are first Dalinar, who is a general in the army and also heavily involved within the conflict itself. We're following Kaladin, who is a young man who is a slave who's forced to work in the labor camps surrounding the armies. We follow a young girl named Shallan, who's basically trying to become a scholar, but she's also trying to steal to save her family from destitute and ruin. And that is truly just the beginning of this plot, to be honest. This series is all about fate and destiny and choices, and also the snowball effect of decisions as they begin to play out. Obviously, what starts out as like a simple war and conflict clearly escalates into what feels much more like world-consuming, world-ending, if you get my drift. This is just such a fantastic series. Characters you will fall in love with, and plot lines that you will just not be able to guess where in the world they are going. So many moments of just such intense plot payoff. I will just keep you flipping the pages, I assure you. I know this is long. I know there's going to be many books, but reading it, rereading it, like I always have a blast reading this series because it's just so dang entertaining. Like there's no other way to describe it. I am just purely entertained while reading this. And the last book that I think is a perfect bingeable read is the Hacienda by Isabel Canas. This is a gothic horror romantic story that absolutely hooked me from page one. I actually listened to the audiobook of this book and I would just sit around my house for hours on end because I could not stop listening to this story. It was gripping and mysterious and melodramatic, and everything about it just made me obsessed with it. But in this story, we follow our main character Beatrice, who's in a very precarious situation with her mother after her father was executed by the Mexican government before the start of this novel. Their home and fortunes were destroyed due to this occurrence. Due to this, Beatrice needs to find a husband and she needs to find find one fast to secure a future for herself, but also her mother. So when she's approached by a very mysterious and notorious man whose previous wife kind of suddenly disappeared, she decides to kind of ignore that and pursue him in marriage because he is offering her something that she is dreaming of, and that is a home for herself. They get married, she travels to his country estate, but when she arrives, she quickly realizes that something is just wrong. Not only is she finding her new husband's sister to be not just unwelcoming, but outright hostile, but something in the house too appears to be unsettling. And when the house begins to kind of invade our main character's dreams, she begins to kind of feel that she's losing her mind. Beatrice herself also tries to seek help from anyone that she can find, but everyone kind of chooses to ignore her, aside from one person, a young and very handsome priest who is in the local church. Together, they begin to do rituals to try to dispel the dark magic and dark spirit that seems to exist within this house, but also things are much more complicated than that. I feel like this book personally perfectly balances like the gothic horror haunted house vibe that is very much this story, while also centering a very dramatic and compelling romantic relationship too at the heart of this book. I feel like that is what is so fun about gothic horror stories, in my opinion. They have on one hand like really disturbing, like horrifying situations, but also like a romance that feels like you shouldn't be caring or rooting for it, but you can't help but to also be equally entertained by it. I feel like this book too just plays with those concepts so well. She also touches on magic and culture and history and community too. I flew through this book. I was riveted by this book. I was entertained by this book. I just needed to know what was going to happen next. If you're looking for kind of a more spooky and romantic read, this is a great book to check out. Alrighty guys, those are some bingeable reading recommendations. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.